From the Baker Institute for Public Policy, this is Baker Briefing. I'm Ambassador David Satterfield. Baker Briefing tackles the most critical foreign and domestic policy issues of the day. Each episode is recorded in front of a live audience. Today's topic, developing a robust hydrogen market in Texas. As greenhouse gas emissions in the United States continue to rise, many are looking to expand low-carbon energy options, notably hydrogen. My colleague, Dr. Ken Medlock, director of the Center for Energy Studies here at the Institute, will discuss his recent publication on this topic and tell us what needs to be done to transform Texas into a hydrogen hub. So, Ken, hydrogen is among the newer, more cutting-edge technologies or energy options. Can you tell us the whys, basically, about hydrogen, where it stands right now, and why Texas?
So it's interesting the way you frame that, because hydrogen is not a new energy carrier. It's been around for quite a while. Probably most notably, it's used by NASA to fuel rockets and send our astronauts and satellites and everything else into outer space. But its migration into mainstream energy architecture is relatively new, although we have been through this rodeo before. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was significant interest in expanding hydrogen, really on the basis of energy security concerns and the classic mantra, get off of foreign oil. It didn't then enjoy the same policy support, though, that it does today. And the technologies that we use to produce hydrogen have advanced considerably in the last 2 decades. So we are at a point now where hydrogen is very much a centerpiece of the low carbon energy option portfolio, if you will. So it has tremendous potential. We know how to use it. We know how to make it. It really is about cost and getting that cost down so that it's competitive and on par with other fuel choices so that consumers don't feel the pain of higher energy prices. The manner in which it's produced introduces tremendous diversity into the fuel spectrum, because we can make it using electricity, which means we can use wind power, solar power to drive electrolyzers and make what's often referred to as green hydrogen. We can use natural gas to make hydrogen, which is how most hydrogen is made today through steam methane reduction. But if we pair that with carbon capture technology, we can reduce the carbon footprint of that hydrogen, leverage existing infrastructures, and begin to grow production that is also greener. There are also new forms of hydrogen production through, for example, methane pyrolysis, where you end up with a solid carbon byproduct. And the solid carbon actually has commercial value because it can be used as a feedstock into, say, tire production, things of that nature. So there are a lot of options on the table, and that presents tremendous advantages for hydrogen as an energy source.
And before we turn to the obstacles or financial impediments in the way, how's Texas doing on hydrogen?
Texas is doing really well. In fact, Texas currently has about 2/3 of the nation's hydrogen transportation infrastructure already installed. These pipelines, storage, tremendous hydrogen use already in the industrial complex, largely in refining, petrochemicals, that sector. But there's a backbone here already. Heavily contingent on natural gas as a feedstock to make hydrogen, which makes sense, quite frankly, because Texas is the largest gas producer in the country, and therefore it also has the lowest prices of natural gas in the country. And ultimately, when you talk about hydrogen production, the cost of the feedstock matters a lot. So when you have low-cost natural gas, it makes hydrogen from natural gas look very attractive. So really what we're talking about in Texas is leveraging those already existing comparative advantages and existing infrastructures to replace current hydrogen with cleaner hydrogen, but also open up new avenues for new hydrogen uses in heavy transport and maritime applications, additional industrial uses, as well as potentially even exports, which we have a tremendous advantage in because we have such tremendous port facilities in Texas.
So Ken, from a standpoint of looking at Texas regulations, Austin's views on this, things are positive?
Things are positive. There is a lot of work that is being done. As a matter of fact, there is potential legislation being discussed in Austin during this session that would more clearly define who has regulatory oversight on hydrogen markets. And that is a really critical piece of the puzzle if we want to see growth above and beyond what's going to be subsidized by the federal government.
And Ken, you've moved right into the question I was going to ask. In all of our discussions we always get back to the point of markets.
Yes.
Technology has a major role to play. Infrastructure does. But you've got to have the market there. How does the hydrogen market stand right now, whether here, nationally, or internationally?
So there isn't really a market for hydrogen. There are transactions for hydrogen. It's a very opaque setting. These are largely bilateral contractual relationships where you have a producer that's signed up for long-term offtake. It provides surety of offtake to the producer so that you'll spend the capital to develop the production capability. The consumer ultimately needs the hydrogen as an input into something they're doing. And so you have this double coincidence of wants, we call it, that results in this bilateral transaction. The trouble is that does not make a market, because a market, when it's truly liquid and has depth, de-risks investment on both the supply and demand side of the equation. In other words, if I'm a small hydrogen producer and I want to start making hydrogen using, say, electrolysis and pairing it with wind, I don't have to worry about, in a truly liquid market setting, signing up a long-term offtake agreement. I'll let the market figure that out for me. I just need a place to deliver, so I need transparency, I need liquidity. That doesn't exist anywhere in the world in hydrogen. So there's a long road ahead of us, not just in the United States, not just in Texas, but everywhere in the world when we talk about market development for hydrogen.
If the share of the automobile market by EVs continues to increase, does that produce a greater role in terms of fuel cells for hydrogen?
Well, there's a bit of a conflagration there. So when we talk about EVs, we're not talking about hydrogen fuel cells typically, right? There are some places around the world that are really emphasizing fuel cell electric vehicles. Sometimes you see these FCEVs, right? This is where you actually refuel with hydrogen, and the hydrogen is used in a fuel cell to generate electricity and drive the car. The typical EV is something you would actually plug in either in your home or at your place of business to recharge the battery. With a fuel cell EV, if those were to take off, that would definitely create demand pull for hydrogen in the private automobile market. The trouble is right now there is very little fueling infrastructure available to seed that market. So inevitably what you have, and California's a great case in point on this, you have a market in California where low carbon fuel standards have been in existence for a while, and there's been a big effort to develop a hydrogen highway and drive fuel cell electric vehicles into the private sector, right? Well, that hasn't really taken off, and electric vehicles, which are later to the game in terms of policy support in California, have accelerated dramatically, and it has everything in the world to do with the fact that if I buy an electric vehicle, I don't have to worry about where I refuel. If I buy a fuel cell EV, I have to worry about where I refuel. So it really is about what already exists and what can leverage that existing infrastructure for growth. It's more likely that as we see hydrogen migrate into transportation, it's going to be in heavy transport applications. So this is heavy trucks moving in and out of ports. They're fixed routes. Logistically, these are easier to manage, site refueling, that kind of a thing. And of course, then maritime transport.
Got you. So if we're serious as a nation, a state, in evolving or helping to evolve hydrogen as an energy option, what specific incentives? You talked about subsidies, but what other incentives are there in a policy sense that will be needed here? Well,
first, there are a very large number of incentives that are primarily focused on production of hydrogen. So the Inflation Reduction Act has a section known as 45V, which incentivizes hydrogen production, where the level of incentive is directly tied to the CO2 intensity of the process. So the cleaner the process, the greater the incentive. That, of course, is meant to level the playing field between different production technologies so that you get to a lower carbon outcome. That's great for encouraging production, but if you're just encouraging production in the absence of a liquid market, there's no price signal developed to transmit and encourage consumption, demand. And you need, for a market to grow, you need to take a full value chain approach. You need to address the supply side issue, you need to address the demand side issues, but then you also need to address the midstream, which is pipes and storage. And so If we can get to a point where there's transparency in the hydrogen market, then subsidies at any point in the value chain matriculate through the rest of the parts of the value chain. In a world we live in today where there's a lack of transparency, that doesn't happen. So what needs to happen is either you, and this is probably the lowest cost approach to be honest with you, you develop a market structure or a market design where transparency is mandated. That way the price signals transmit and they carry the information that's needed for investment to be incentivized. Absent that, there's going to have to be an increased focus on demand side incentives as well as midstream incentives. And midstream is complicated because it's hard to permit and build anything in this country at the moment, including pipes, including storage. We often hear about this in terms of other commodities like natural gas or transmission when we talk about electric power, but building hydrogen pipelines is no different. Storage needs to be developed to support growing, robust market activity. And then on the demand side, you're really talking about in existence currently are relatively small programs like clean bus programs, stuff like that. But if you really want to incentivize industrial scale, utility scale uptake, you're going to have to address the demand side at a much larger level.
How much does Washington recognize the points you just made?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think policymakers in general don't really look past what they're presented at the moment they're discussing these issues. Some of the career professionals like the Department of Energy and FERC and Department of Transportation, I mean, you name the cabinet, they get it, right? They understand this very well. As a matter of fact, there have been recently more conversations about secondary markets in hydrogen so that transparency can be developed. And it's a little later to the game than the discussion about subsidizing everything. That probably isn't abnormal in terms of the evolution of the market, but it's going to have to accelerate if we really want to see growth in hydrogen beyond what we subsidize.
And in terms of transport and storage, is it much more expensive or technically demanding for hydrogen than for other current energy options?
No, it's just different. There are already active salt cavern storage facilities. For example, Air Liquide owns and operates one here in Texas. A sizable amount of hydrogen can be stored, injected, withdrawn on a daily basis, so you can manage, demand with supply and any fluctuations that might exist therein. Pipelines, we know how to build them. It's a different type of material. So for example, we wouldn't just repurpose an existing natural gas pipeline system to move hydrogen because hydrogen can embrittle the steel and create some safety issues. So it's just a different material that we have to deploy. So it's just about building it though.
And how's Europe doing on all of this?
Europe is really pushing hard, particularly in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, is really pushing hard on hydrogen and heavily emphasizing green hydrogen or hydrogen from electrolysis using renewables. Interestingly, there's a recognition that they don't really have the land to expand and do this all there. So they are actually starting to incentivize the import of green ammonia, which is a hydrogen derivative fuel that's produced somewhere else and brought in so that it can be used, and it's zero CO2 footprint. So Europe, with all of its aspirations and its push towards green energy, is going to be, despite what some of the pundits might say, right, is going to be a net importer of energy even in a post-carbon world.
And we're a net exporter, including
Yes.
of the precursors here.
Yes, we are.
Great. Ken, thanks very much. We'll be following this one, and the Institute's role in researching, assessing, making recommendations on hydrogen technologies is a critical one. So,
Absolutely.
we'll stay tuned. Baker Briefing is brought to you by a team at Baker Institute for Public Policy. This episode was produced by Victoria Jupp and Shannon Moriarty. AV production was led by Kevin Young. Many thanks to the Baker Institute production interns who assisted with this episode: Maya Adhikari, Sarah Davidson, and Lisa Jacob. The Baker Institute for Public Policy provides meaningful analysis on the most critical challenges facing Texas, the United States, and the world. It is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization based in Houston. To learn more, including how you can attend a live podcast recording on the campus of Rice University, visit us at bakerinstitute.org. Thank you for listening.